I anticipated the front porch light to be on, and the cozy buzz of home to be waiting behind the door when I got home from a peaceful visit with an old friend. Rather, I discovered my life crammed into a box and discarded like garbage. I had my light on the doormat, sideways. Half unzipped, my luggage leaned against the bushes. A folded piece of paper was attached to a picture frame of my son and myself on top of everything else. 6 words. A silent erasure, without any prior notice or justification. I now realized that there had been more than just betrayal. Being forced out wasn't the only thing at stake. It has to do with being thoughtlessly replaced. Have you ever realized that you no longer belong at your own doorstep? It was a calm night, the type of silence that precedes a rainstorm. I was just gone for a few days, going upstate to see an old buddy. There is no drama, disagreement, or residual strain. I hadn't allowed myself to feel any, however. When I departed, the home was quiet. At the car, Brendan even gave me a hug. Kayla promised to irrigate the garden. However, I had a bad feeling as soon as I got out of the Uber and onto the driveway. There was no light on the porch. It was dark outside the windows. Then I noticed it. Beside a plastic storage container, my baggage was neatly placed. A cushion I had stitched myself decades ago with worn edges rested on top. My bedside light. 2 framed photos, one of the 3 of us during Brendan's college years, and one of my late spouse. Beside them, a message written in Brendan's handwriting was fastened beneath a magnet after being folded once. I apologize, Mother. No room left for you. There is no punctuation, no signature. I remained still for a long time. I refrained from crying. I didn't knock. Nothing could be said. I gently put the pictures into my luggage after lifting it and tucking the light under my arm. I didn't turn around when I left the door. I didn't echo my steps. The curtain was not opened. Shouting could never be heard over the hush. I halted at the street corner and made one quick turn around. It was still dark on the porch. I continued to walk. That first night, I slept on a bench a few streets from the home, next to the communal garden. I wasn't ready to contact anyone yet, but it wasn't the most pleasant spot to sleep. Silence was what I needed. The gentle, unassuming sort that thrives amid the rustling of maple leaves and the early morning air, not the icy solitude of a shut door. I had always found peace in the garden. Brendan helped me construct a compost bin there years ago before Kayla entered the scene. I showed him how to cut herbs without causing any harm to the roots. When he was little, I would take him here after school. I was older, stiffer, and still attempting to put things together as I sat in the same place. As I made my way to the adjacent bus station, the sun was just starting to rise. I had no idea where I was going. All I had to do was move. By the middle of the morning, I was strolling by a line of homes close to the park. One of them had a familiar appearance. Kayla and Brendan had discussed the possibility of relocating there eventually. It was a more recent construction with polished railings and large windows. Then I caught sight of them. I could see Brendan standing close to the dining table through the transparent curtains of the corner unit. Kayla flipped through a folder while seated across from him. Their faces were attentive and their heads were close together. Kayla chuckled. Brendan smiled tightly. She raised an object. It resembled a brochure for real estate. There was a big picture of a kitchen with white, shiny surfaces. She enthusiastically pointed at it. Brendan turned his head away. He raised a cup to his lips, but did not take a sip. For a moment, I thought he spotted me as his gaze strayed to the window. However, he did not respond. He might not have been looking at anything. Kayla continued, and Brendan gave a hesitant nod. When he was a teenager and didn't want to dispute, his shoulders sagged. Something changed inside of me at that point. Like parts of a jigsaw, all the little moments from the previous several months came back. Kayla insisted on paying the utility bills at that point. The manner that every time I mentioned the home, Brendan was silent. The odd letter that included my address, but his name. The little pauses in his speech. The indicators had escaped my notice. Or perhaps I hadn't decided to see them. I waited until the curtain moved a little, like though the breeze had brushed it. As I went away, my legs felt heavy. Not from exhaustion, but from a growing weight I couldn't yet name. There was no confrontation that day, no banging on the glass or shouting through the door, just the quiet realization that something deliberate had unfolded behind my back. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. It was planned, calculated, and I had been the last to know. I walked farther than I needed to, ended up at the edge of the lake near the library. The surface of the water was still. I sat on the stone wall and let the stillness settle into me. I didn't cry, but for the first time since I had read that note, I began to wonder how deep the damage truly ran and just how far back it began. The morning after, I wandered toward the public library, not for books, but for the plug-in outlets and quiet. My phone had died sometime in the night, and I hadn't brought a charger on my trip, thinking I'd be home by now. I found a corner near the window, plugged the phone in, and let it buzz back to life. Only one notification blinked on the screen. A missed call. Brendan. No voicemail, no text. Just the timestamp around 11:42 p.m. the night before. I stared at it for a moment. He hadn't followed up. I closed the screen and slipped the phone into my pocket. A familiar voice broke the quiet. Someone saying my name soft at first, then clearer. I turned and saw Martina Wilkes. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 6 years. She had been a colleague of mine when I worked in legal insurance review. Smart, sharp-tongued, the kind of woman who read the fine print with a magnifying glass and never missed a deadline. She had always worn her confidence like armor. We hugged briefly. She asked what brought me in. I gave a vague response. Just passing time. She nodded, sensing I wasn't ready to spill. She offered coffee from the machine down the hall, and we sat near the side window. After some light chatter about aging knees and politics, she leaned in. She told me she'd run into Kayla a week ago at a local property mixer. Said Kayla was all smiles talking about plans for the house, possibly listing it soon. There was a new development opening up, and she and Brendan were looking into it. Martina assumed I had already downsized and moved out. I didn't answer right away. Martina read my face like a document under review. She sat up straighter. "Something doesn't feel right," she said. I nodded slowly, letting the silence confirm it. Martina asked if I had access to the house title. I said I used to. She encouraged me to double-check ownership details. Said she once handled a case where a daughter-in-law had power of attorney, switched quietly, moved her mother-in-law into assisted living, and flipped the house in less than 6 weeks. I felt the color leave my face, but not from fear, from recognition. I had brushed off so many moments. Kayla offering to manage the water bill, Brendan forgetting to hand me the insurance notice, the missing checkbook last spring. They weren't accidents. Martina offered to help. She still consulted part-time for women in complicated family transitions. She had seen too many mothers edged out of their own homes by paperwork and polite lies. She handed me her card, though I already had her number stored deep in an old notebook back home. We sat in silence for a while. She didn't press. That was the thing about old friends. They gave space, without explanation. Later that day, I walked to the post office and rented a small box. My name, my address, even if it was just a metal drawer in a federal building. A place to redirect anything Kayla or Brendan might still be trying to claim. That evening, as I watched the sun stretch across the sidewalk outside the shelter I had checked into, I felt something different than sadness. A kind of quiet clarity. The storm wasn't over, but now I was finally turning to face it. The key still worked. I hadn't stepped foot inside my old studio in over 5 years, but somehow my hand knew the turn, the slight resistance in the lock, the gentle push to get the warped door to open. The second-floor space above the old bookstore used to be where I met clients back when I did part-time consulting for insurance claims. After Richard passed, and the house felt too full of memories, I'd kept the lease on this place as a sort of quiet retreat. No one but me and Martina ever came here. The air smelled like time had folded in on itself. Dust and lemon oil, the faint trace of printer ink and dried lavender from the sachet I had left in a drawer. I walked slowly, touching the edge of the bookshelf, running my fingers along the old desk I once used to sort policy paperwork and pension forms for widows who had no one else to help them. In the back cabinet, beneath a stack of manila folders and a faded holiday mug, I found what I needed. The original deed, the notarized copy of the title, all of it still in my name. Brendan's wasn't mentioned anywhere, not even as a beneficiary. I sat down at the desk and spread out everything in front of me. There was more. I found the co-ownership agreement Richard and I had drawn up when we bought the house. It explicitly stated that if one of us passed, the other retained full rights. Brendan had never been added, never discussed. We wanted him to make his own life, not take ours. Then came the stack of bills I had kept out of habit: water, electricity, trash. I flipped through the most recent ones I had brought from the house. All were now addressed to Kayla. My name had been wiped clean. It hadn't been gradual. It had been fast, quiet, surgical. A copy of a utility request form with a forged signature sat at the top of one envelope. I could tell it wasn't my handwriting. They had already begun the process of replacing me not just in the house, but on paper, as if I had never existed. I didn't cry. Instead, I got up, opened the small fireproof safe I kept under the desk, and placed the deed and the old agreement inside. I added a copy of my ID and the last tax return that still listed the property under my name. Then I locked it. I looked around the room once more. No pictures of Brendan here. Just a photo of Richard and me at a fundraiser. Both laughing, both in the middle of living. I closed the door softly behind me, not because I feared it would slam, but because something sacred had just been disturbed. They thought I was out, but they had no idea what I still held, not just legally, but in memory, in resolve, and in proof. The next morning, I stood quietly at the crosswalk outside Martina's office, clutching an envelope tight beneath my coat. Around me, the city hummed with movement, people streaming past with coffee cups and earbuds, thinking about meetings, errands, and nothing close to what I carried in my hands. They didn't know I had been erased slowly and deliberately, but I knew. Martina greeted me with that familiar no-nonsense look. Her office still smelled like lavender oil and copier paper exactly as I remembered. I laid the documents out on her desk without saying a word. The house deed, the joint ownership agreement from decades ago, the forged utility requests, the tax papers, the pieces of me they had tried to cut out. Martina didn't flinch. She skimmed every page, slowly flipping back twice, then leaned back in her chair. "This is no mistake," she said. "They're laying groundwork to remove you, and I think they know you won't fight back." Her words didn't sting. They just settled into a space that had been empty for a long time. A space where I had once been someone who acted, who calculated risk, who spoke with certainty. She picked up her phone and called in a favor. Within minutes, she had a name: Ashby Sterling, a retired estate attorney who used to specialize in asset protection for older women. According to Martina, she didn't just read contracts, she read people. 2 days later, I stood on the porch of Ashby's home office. The house was small, tidy, and quiet. A white wooden swing swayed in the breeze, and the curtains in the front window shifted like someone had just walked past them. Ashby greeted me with a calm nod and led me inside. She was older than me, maybe by 5 years, with short silver hair and a presence that didn't need to fill space to command it. I handed her everything. She read slowly. Her eyes moved like a surgeon's hands. When she was done, she folded her fingers and said evenly, "None of this changes the fact that you're still the sole legal owner. The utilities being moved, the mail redirect, the digital address change. It's circumstantial. It's not lawful transfer. But if they attempt to use it to leverage a sale or a refinance that becomes fraud." I nodded, feeling the heat return to my cheeks. I hadn't even realized how cold I'd been. Ashby walked me through the next steps. A formal cease and desist letter, notification to the county clerk's office to flag any attempted transactions. Documentation filed with a soft restriction that would delay any unauthorized movement of title. It wasn't dramatic, but it was effective. We printed everything that day. I signed with a pen that didn't shake. Martina arranged for a courier to deliver one sealed envelope to Brendan's office and another to Kayla's last known workplace. Ashby also suggested filing a protective memorandum with the neighborhood council. That step would alert local legal realtors and banks in the area that any claim on the house not coming from me was to be treated with caution. It wouldn't stop them outright, but it would slow them down. That afternoon, I stood in the hallway of Ashby's office waiting for my ride. I glanced in the mirror hanging near her coat rack. I looked tired, but behind my eyes, something new had settled. A steadiness. A line had been drawn. They hadn't taken everything. They had just taken my silence for granted, and that mistake they would come to regret. By the end of that week, every letter had been sent, one by courier to Brendan's law firm downtown, one to Kayla's office at the wellness clinic where she managed scheduling and finance, another copy filed at the county office, flagged and sealed. I hadn't spoken a word to either of them since I left the house that morning with my suitcase. Then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, my phone started ringing. Brendan's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring out. Then again and again. No voicemails, no texts, just repeated calls spaced like he was hoping to catch me off guard. By the sixth attempt, a message finally came in. From Kayla. It read short and sharp. "You didn't have to go this far." I sat with that message for a long while. I didn't reply, but later that night, I sent one line. "Everything has a reason. So does this." I knew the silence would be louder than any explanation. The next morning, I stopped by my old neighborhood just after sunrise. I didn't go to the house. I only walked along the sidewalk near the park, passing the garden where I used to take Brendan when he was little. I could see the backyard from a distance. The blinds were drawn. By noon, Martina called me. Brendan had emailed her firm's generic inbox, asking if the documents were valid. Ashby answered herself professionally and briefly. She confirmed the cease and desist was active. She included her license number and offered to direct him to the property records if he needed independent confirmation. There were no legal threats, no accusations, just a wall of clarity. That evening, Brendan showed up at my studio. He knocked, then waited a long time. I opened the door just enough to see his face. His eyes were tired, less angry than confused. He asked if we could talk. I stepped aside, not to welcome him, but to show I wasn't afraid. He stood by the window looking down at the stack of papers on my table. He said he hadn't known about everything, that Kayla had taken the lead because she thought I needed rest, that it wasn't supposed to escalate this far. I didn't interrupt. Finally, I asked one thing not as a mother, but as a woman speaking to a grown man who should have known better. Why didn't you stop her? He looked at the floor. His answer came slowly. Because I didn't want the conflict. Because it felt easier to step back. Because I didn't think you'd push back. It wasn't cruelty. It was cowardice. He hadn't chosen her over me. He had chosen silence over discomfort, and that I realized was its own kind of betrayal. He asked if there was anything he could do now. I told him the letters had been sent, the alerts had been filed. The title was no longer vulnerable. The house was no longer in question. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him enough. When he left, I closed the door gently behind him, not with rage, not with grief, just a quiet kind of certainty, the kind you carry when you've already lost the illusion of family and found something steadier in its place: yourself. The next few days passed without another word from Brendan or Kayla. I didn't expect an apology, and I certainly didn't expect understanding, but I did expect movement, a reaction. And when it came, it was calculated. Saturday morning, a courier arrived. A white envelope with my name neatly typed, no return address. Inside was a letter from a real estate firm addressed not to me, but to Brendan and Kayla. A carbon copy of an internal inquiry form was included, requesting documents for pre-sale evaluation of the house. My house. I didn't panic. I just called Martina. She met me at my studio an hour later, scanned the letter, and cursed under her breath. We both knew what this meant. They were trying to test the system to push past the alerts Ashby had placed, maybe hoping someone in the system wouldn't catch it. A quiet attempt, another shadow move. Martina was ready. She called Ashby and forwarded the documents. Within hours, Ashby filed a second-level restriction with the property office and flagged the realtor directly with legal notification. Any further attempt to inquire about the home would require direct authorization from me, notarized and certified. The wall around my house was now reinforced. Still, the audacity stunned me. Not just the attempt to erase me from the deed, but to pretend I had never mattered. As if the years I spent building that home, the love poured into its corners, could be dismissed with a signature forged in convenience. That night, I slept lightly. Sunday afternoon, Brendan came again. He didn't knock, just stood outside the door until I opened it. His eyes held something tighter this time, not desperation, more like strategy. He asked if we could talk. I nodded, but didn't invite him inside. He stood on the porch. He said Kayla had made a mistake, that things had moved too fast, that she was scared I would retaliate, make everything public. He kept using words like misunderstanding, oversight, communication gap. I didn't say much. I let the silence work harder than any argument. Then I looked him in the eye and said what I had been holding in since this began. You knew. You always knew. And you let it happen because it benefited you. He didn't argue. He said he never wanted it to come to this, that he was tired, that standing between me and Kayla was impossible. That was the moment something inside me shifted for good, because I finally saw it clearly. He hadn't been manipulated. He hadn't been trapped. He had made a choice, not because he hated me, but because standing with me would have required courage, and comfort was easier than courage. I thanked him for coming. Then I closed the door, not angrily, not with bitterness, just with the finality of someone who had seen the truth unmasked and could no longer pretend not to see. The morning fog hung low as I crossed the street toward Martina's office, a bag of scones in hand, and a sense of quiet resolve in my chest. Something told me things weren't done unraveling, and I was right. Martina stood by her window when I entered. She didn't turn to greet me. She just held up a file thick with printed pages and said calmly, "I think we've got a problem." She spread the papers across her desk. The first was a digital printout of a loan pre-approval application from a regional bank. It had Brendan's name on it, and mine. Next to mine was a signature that looked eerily familiar, but it wasn't mine. It was a sloppy copy of my name, dragged and dropped into boxes I never saw. Martina had pulled the documents from a private records monitor she used for certain clients. Something about Brendan's activity had triggered a soft red flag. He had created an online account under a joint ownership profile, submitted fabricated authorization forms, and was attempting to secure a line of credit against the house. The documents included a scanned ID, my old driver's license, and a utility bill with my name barely visible. Just enough to make it look real to someone in a hurry, but not enough to survive scrutiny. Martina's face was tight. This isn't just manipulation. It's criminal. I sat down. My stomach was still not from shock, but from a kind of weary clarity. They weren't just removing me from their lives. They were trying to erase my legal existence too. We called Ashby. She came to Martina's office that afternoon, a leather case tucked under one arm, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She reviewed the paperwork, took her time, then said evenly, "He's created a fictitious authorization trail. That's forgery. Why a fraud if he's submitted anything online?" Ashby moved fast. She drafted a formal complaint to the bank's fraud investigation unit, filed a notice with the local district attorney's office under quiet flag protocol. Then she took out a different form, one that would be filed with the neighborhood council and property registrar, freezing any transactions or claims made using my name or address, unless verified by me in person. A silent lockdown. Brendan wouldn't know about it until he tried to move again. But when he did, he would hit a wall. A firm one, built from paper and precision. Martina sat beside me while Ashby worked. Her voice was soft when she said, "Some sons take after their mothers. Others learn from different examples." I didn't respond. I just stared out the window, watching a pair of sparrows wrestle for crumbs on the sidewalk. I thought of Brendan as a little boy running through that same sidewalk with grass-stained jeans and skinned elbows. And then I thought of the man who now tried to write my name into something he didn't earn. By the end of the day, everything was filed. Ashby made sure copies were stored in multiple systems, flagged with alerts, and backed up with notarized affidavits. I left with a folder tucked under my arm and something stronger than anger filling my lungs. It was clarity. They had erased me on paper, but now I had written myself back in. The invitation came in the form of a text from Brendan. Short, polite, almost too polite. "We're having a family discussion Saturday. Hope you can come. It's time to clear the air." I stared at the message for a long time. The phrase family discussion sat on the screen like it still meant something. Like I still belonged. I didn't respond right away. I forwarded it to Ashby and she replied within minutes. "Let me come with you just in case." Saturday afternoon arrived with gray skies and the kind of wind that made you wrap your coat tighter without thinking. Ashby picked me up in her sensible navy sedan. She had her briefcase and calm presence and a copy of the cease and desist letter notarized and bound. The house looked just as I remembered. White shutters, red door, a planter box full of petunias struggling against the cold. But everything felt different, like walking into a replica of your life built by someone else's hands. Inside the living room was staged, literally. Cushions, fluffed candles burning a cheese board on the table. Kayla stood by the fireplace in a tailored sweater, her smile stretched too wide. Brendan greeted us with a handshake, eyes darting between me and Ashby. He looked nervous, not confused, not angry, just prepared. We sat. No one touched the food. Kayla started speaking her voice smooth like she was presenting a pitch. "We know there's been some tension lately, and we wanted to invite you here to have an open, respectful dialogue. This is still your home too," she said, gesturing toward the room. Ashby reached into her briefcase and set down the letter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Actually, this home belongs solely to my client Marjorie Lindell. She remains the legal owner on all official documentation. Any representations otherwise have been formally challenged and recorded. This is not a discussion. It's a confirmation. Silence fell. Brendan paled. Kayla blinked once, then twice. The the kind of blink people do when their plans stall midair. Ashby continued. We are also aware of forged documents submitted to multiple institutions. Those filings have been reported and flagged. Further action is pending, but for now my client reserves the right to press charges. Kayla's voice dropped an octave. This isn't how we wanted to do things. I looked at her for the first time that day, really looked, and I saw it then, the cracks, the loss of control, the realization that whatever story she'd been spinning had just come unraveled. Brendan tried to speak, but stopped himself. He just stared at the document, hands clenched. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't make a speech. I just said, "You tried to write me out of my own life. You thought I wouldn't notice." Then I turned to leave. Ashby followed. At the door, she paused and said one final line. If you attempt to interfere again, legal proceedings will follow immediately. Outside, the wind was colder, but it felt fresh, cleansing. We didn't talk on the drive back. I didn't need to. Because in that silence, something had shifted. They had wanted to bury me in paperwork, but I had shown them I was still standing. The next morning, I packed a single overnight bag and walked into the old house one last time. I had the keys. I still held the deed. But ownership and belonging were never quite the same, were they? Kayla was in the kitchen washing dishes with unnecessary force. Brendan sat at the dining table, hands folded like a child waiting to be scolded. They didn't speak. I stood by the threshold for a moment, letting the silence draw its own boundary. Then I said it. I'm selling the house. Kayla froze. Brendan looked up, lips parted but without a word. I continued, not for revenge, not to punish anyone, just because it's mine. And I no longer want to share my name with walls that have forgotten me. I placed a folder on the table. Inside was the listing agreement already signed. Ashby had handled everything discreetly with the precision only a woman who's seen it all can carry. Brendan's voice cracked. But where will you live? I looked at him not unkindly, but without softness. That's not your concern anymore. He blinked and looked down. Kayla didn't meet my eyes. I saw the tremble in her shoulders, but offered no comfort. Comfort had been spent. All that remained was clarity. As I turned to leave, I paused. There was one last thing to say, the only thing that mattered. The sale proceeds will not be going into your pockets. I watched Kayla's posture stiffen. Brendan exhaled slowly. I continued. I've transferred the full amount into a foundation, a fund for women over 60 who've been manipulated, discarded, or silenced by their own families. It will help them find legal support, housing, and dignity. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. Martina will be the executive director. Ashby has agreed to oversee compliance. This house built a family, but families fall apart when love becomes conditional. So I'm letting it go. No threats, no arguments, just a simple fact. You made space by pushing me out. Now I'll make space for someone else who needs it. I didn't wait for a reply. I stepped outside, closed the door gently behind me, and walked down the path like it had never been mine. The sun had risen while I was inside. I hadn't noticed until then. The sidewalk glittered with early frost, and my breath fogged in the air. But I felt warm in a way I hadn't in years. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. Instead, I opened my phone and pulled up the address of my new apartment. Small, quiet, mine. Then I tapped send on the press release Ashby had drafted. That week, the foundation would become public. I figured someone would read my unobtrusive message in the back of a local newsletter. It was my desire that they would sit with the emotion. Of loss, not of rage. They suddenly recognized what they had thrown away, not because I had taken anything from them. Despite its diminutive size, the flat was bright with early light. Every daybreak streamed over the sill like a silent promise from my bedroom window, which faced east. I kept things straightforward. There's a little reading chair at the window. One framed picture from years ago of me by myself near the sea. A clay container with a lavender plant. Mercy is the name I gave it. I switched on the radio in the evenings to listen to local stations, primarily jazz and weather reports, as there was no television. At first, the silence seemed strange, not empty, but fresh. I brewed tea, put on my walking shoes, and went outdoors each morning. The pathway behind the complex was a short one, surrounded by low pines. Every day, I traveled the same path, waving to the woman with her golden dog who ran in the other direction. She smiled initially after a few weeks, but we never spoke. On certain days, Martina would stop over with pastries and discuss the foundation's early response. Small but consistent donations were made. After reading about the fund in a church publication, a woman in Utah had written to us. Her tale was too well known. "Thank you for existing," she had written. I read it twice. Officially, the old house was sold. According to the documents Ashby filed, Kayla and Brendan had left before the transfer. They didn't get back to me. Neither calls nor messages were received. I wasn't as stung by the stillness as I had anticipated. The feeling of abandonment had subsided. It had the feel of vastness. I started writing in the nights. Nothing official, simply a notebook with a velvety brown cover sewn together with pages of thinking and recollection. I occasionally wrote about my early years. At other times, I wrote about quiet and how, depending on who is holding it, it may be a weapon or a haven. One day, a call came in from a municipal women's club. My name had been passed forward. They sought someone with real experience to talk at their conference on elder autonomy. Without hesitation, I answered, sure. I stood at the window overlooking the parking lot that evening. Long shadows were cast on the asphalt by the street lamplight. I didn't feel insignificant. I didn't experience erasure. I simply felt here. That was a source of calm. After shutting out the lights, I climbed into bed and allowed the quiet to envelop me, to finally hear my own breath, not to block out the outside world. I discovered it again one day as I was moving the little storage cabinet behind my desk. The picture, Brendan's college graduation photo. Everyone was present. Kayla, Brendan, and even my Nebraska sister-in-law. I kept a pressed daisy in the area behind the glass since the frame had always been too big for the picture. This time, though, it was the image's edge that attracted my attention. Perhaps I had chosen not to notice before. The picture had been cropped by someone. My face had been surgically taken out, as if I had never been there next to them. It was not ripped or crushed. I looked at it for a long time, not in awe or even sorrow, but simply because I recognized it. I refrained from crying. I didn't discard it. To put it in a wooden box I kept in the back of my closet, I just took out the photo and put it in a fabric bag. That box included a birthday card signed by Brendan's child alone, old keys, and a ribbon from my son's 5th grade spelling bee. Just a crayon painting of a balloon, with no reference to Grandma. With no rage or sorrow, only silence, I carefully closed the box. People sometimes assume that healing is loud and thunderous, yet it may also be quiet, sluggish, and scarcely noticeable at times. However, it transforms everything when it gets there. I never forgot about Kayla or Brendan. I just decided not to make those who had cut me out of their lives the center of my existence. Letting go may be powerful, not for pride or retaliation, but for serenity and understanding. I put fresh lavender on the windowsill that spring. It grew, yet it flowered crookedly and unevenly toward the sun. That was sufficient. I never, ever turned around. I appreciate you listening, if this narrative found a peaceful space inside of you. Many women endure years of quiet before making their own decision. Have you ever experienced being erased in presence rather than in words? I encourage you to share or just think. Your tale, like mine, has weight, and occasionally we begin to blossom again, quietly, methodically, and in our own time, after hearing or speaking it.